All right, after a little technical situation, we're now back online, and we're still on the special use permit for the property behind the former Kmart. And so we have one of the developers that they're going to get in front of the camera and talk to us. So if you would give us your name and address, some of the members of Planning Commission want to ask you a couple of questions.
My name is Scott Smile, 113 Goodson Street, Bristol, Virginia. And I am the guy that dreamed up this project.
All right. Mr. Mayor, I think you had a question.
Yes. On the units itself, Scott, will they be individually metered? Utilities, no sewer, water, electric? The other question would be, are there going to be any facade changes to the building?
There will be facade. There'll be new windows. We're going to try to give it a home look versus the commercial building look. So we're going to do awnings. We're going to change the color. Of course, we want to get out with the least expense in the beginning that we can without compromising the facial structure. As far as the sewers, we're going to offer something really unique. We're going to try this experiment because it's worked for me on several of my rental homes. We're going to offer a one price deal where you get water, internet, cable, electric, and everything. We're going to pay for it all. And if you see that, I think it's a question of when the casino gets approved, the new people that are going to come in are going to look for a chance to not have to put up a deposit. They're going to be able to just come straight into our place and move in. So yes, we are going to furnish all utilities.
All right. Does that answer that question?
Yep.
Margaret, I think you had a question.
Yeah, just curious, a couple of things, I guess, for interior. A couple of places you talk about 8 units and then 10, about 1 bedroom, about 2 bedroom. The drawing you have actually has 2 baths shown. I know it's not a final drawing, but just curious for what it's going to be looking like.
Well, we would like to have 2 baths, of course, if the city will allow us, because if you have 2 bedrooms, we've actually thrown the idea around of having 1 bedroom, 1 great room, and then a living room, because we feel like we're going to cater to the business person. But whatever the city will let us do and requires us, we are going to follow it to the letter. But yes, we are proposing 2 bathrooms. We feel like if there's 2 people that live there, it would make it more appealing to them.
And the other question I asked also was the condition of the parking lot isn't great. So didn't know if, and part of these questions we don't have purview over, but just curious for, besides doing some landscaping, but the actual resurfacing or making it.
Margaret, that is a great one, because the greatest point about this building is one of my friends I've known for over 40 years. His name is Wayne Stoffel. He works for one of the premier paving places, and he owes me a favor, and I plan on cashing that favor in on a parking lot. The city doesn't require us to do the whole parking lot, but I mean, we have plans to do the entire parking lot. This building has sat empty for over a decade, and we're going to make it a positive, and we're going to try to shine it up and make it to where it's a place even you may come and visit and stay if you were visiting Bristol.
Great.
All right. What other questions do we have of the developer?
Scott, what is the term of the lease? Is it a monthly, 6 months, year?
We're going to try for a year, but one of the partners, which Larry Neese and Michael Neese are my partners, they're the gentlemen that are in on this project with me. I asked them to come here with us just so they could see what it entails. But we've thrown around 6 months lease. We've thrown around month-to-month lease. My philosophy's always been, if you don't want to be in my place, give me 30 days and you can move. I don't like to hold people to leases. But on the other hand, I own Volunteer Village right now, and it is at 100% occupancy. So, and we've got a 5-person waiting list right now ready to get in it. So I do make my places very appealing, and my customers want to stay. But once again, if a tenant wanted to leave, even if they had a year lease, we would not pursue and making that lease stand. We would let them out of their lease.
Do we have any other questions? Scott, I certainly hope that you're going to look to BTES as your internet and provider of your various utilities there.
I have about 30 accounts with BTS, and my system has been extremely successful. I actually furnish power, water, and cable and internet to a lot of my tenants, and it's proven to be very good for me. But absolutely, I love BTS.
Glad to hear that. All right, any other questions? Is there anybody else that wants to address the Planning Commission on this?
No, Mr. Chairman, we have nobody else that wishes to speak.
Thank you very much. We'll bring it back to Scott. Thank you for talking with us. We'll bring it back to the Planning Commission, and we'll entertain a motion at this time.
Thank you.
I'd hate for this to die for the lack of a motion.
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we approve staff's recommendation.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and we do have a second. We're now open for discussion on the motion that's on the floor, which is to approve staff's recommendation. Any discussion? Hearing none. Roll call. What?
Oh, go ahead.
No, what you got? Jason, you always have something. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm good. Just a random thought rattling around in my brain that doesn't need to be uttered, so I'm good.
A little early voting fatigue. Roll call.
Kelly Graham,
Yes.
Nayland Luttrell,
Yes.
Joel Staten is yes. Jason Boer,
Yes.
Kevin Buck.
Yes.
Scott Gainer,
Yes.
Takashu,
Yes.
Mark Webb,
Yes.
Margaret Firerobin.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Next up is rezoning of King College Road.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, up for consideration is a request to rezone a piece of property and a little small triangle of property from R3 to B1B on King College Road. This would be the applicant Laura Martirano, and it says in the city of Bristol because of the little triangle piece that Sheriff Young will discuss. But anyway, wants to put a child clinic in there, a therapy clinic. And with that, I will let Ms. Young give the presentation.
Thank you. So tonight, the rezoning request is focused on 1745 King College Road and 1741 King College Road. As Mr. Beaver stated, the applicants tonight are Mrs. Laura Martirano and the City of Bristol. The owners of the property, though, are Cornerstone Chapel Church. Mr. Walter Flynn is the trustee that's representing the project, and then Mr. Michael Harris. The rezoning, the subject parcels are approximately 2.81 acres and then 0.16 acres. And the current land uses are a vacant church building and then a single family residential home. So we'll look at those in just a minute on the map. The next slide, here we go, shows the map. So the parcels hatched in red are what we're going to talk about tonight. If you look at these, the larger parcel, which Tim, can you run that? Yeah, there we go, is the vacant church building. So this is the the reason we started this rezoning process, we received a request to rezone this parcel for a business use of a child counseling center. But when we got to looking at the map, which if you go to the next map, maybe Tim might show it a little bit better. There's a little bit of a little triangle down here of the parcel next door actually has the R3 zoning on it. So the owner of this property, Mr. Harris, is agreeable and okay with rezoning this small triangle as well. So the totality of the rezone is the parcel with the church and then a just triangle of the property next door. So both those people are willing and agreeable to the rezoning request. You can see most of King College Road, at least in this section on this side of the street, has the B1B zoning. So Tim has shown that little corridor has the B1B zone on it already. Across the street, you have some residential zones, R1A and R3, and then back in behind these properties, you have some residential zoning. But the majority of this corridor on that side of the street is zoned B1B already. So here are a few photos of the property. The photo on the left is the subject property, former church building, and then the photo to the right is looking at that little corner of the lot that Mr. Harris resides on. So those are the two property photos. The next slide shows the surrounding existing zoning and existing land use, which we just kind of talked about. That you do have quite a bit of a variety of the R zones in this area across the street and back behind this property. So you have some R3, some R1A, R2, but you do, like we discussed, have the B1B along that section of King College Road. Existing land uses, should say vacant church building. Here we have multifamily residential, and then some single family residential in the area. So the next slide shows just a flavor of what are some of the permitted uses and special use permit uses in the R3 zone. So permitted uses include multifamily, cemeteries, general farming, parks, private, public utilities, single family developments, home occupations, public libraries, bed and breakfast. And then your special use permit uses include utility buildings, churches, daycare centers, hospitals, philanthropic institutions and clubs, and then some of those sports clubs, private golf, swim, tennis clubs. You also have assisted living facilities that are a special use item in the R3 district. B1B expands to include some of the neighborhood commercial type uses that you have to service a neighborhood. So you can have, in addition to single family and duplexes, you have some limited retail trade uses. You have some professional uses. You have some limited healthcare and social assistance uses. You can have full service restaurants in the B1B. There are some repair and maintenance uses that are limited to things like electronics and household goods. And you have a use for religious, grant making, civic, professional, and similar organizations as a permitted use. The special use permit uses are listed here. I'm not going to read them again because they're the exact same as what's allowed in the R3 zone. This slide shows an excerpt from the city's future land use plan. The map shows a little area along the corridor that's kind of a pink with some red marks in it. Yeah, there we go. So this land use classification is a neighborhood commercial designation. So that lines up well with the B1B zone, which allows uses that serve the neighborhood. So the future land use map does support this rezoning request. Also, it lines up with two of the policies that are listed here, so policy 3 and policy 6, and those both speak to encouraging continued growth and redevelopment in strategic areas throughout Bristol's main corridors, and then to encourage redevelopment of buildings that are underutilized. So the future land use plan does support the rezoning request for this property. We did place public notification signs on the property here announcing the request, meeting date, location, and gave our contact number. We did send out adjacent property owner notification letters, and we did receive 2 comment letters back. So both were in favor of the rezoning. Those are included in your package. And then I did speak with the property owner that he owns the property that's adjacent to the church property. And he is also in favor of the rezoning request. So I spoke to him by phone, but he is in favor. So both adjacent property owners are in favor of the rezoning request. So due to the adjacent commercial zoning on the adjacent parcel and agreement with the policies in the future land use plan and policy, the staff recommendation to Planning Commission is to send a favorable recommendation to City Council for this request. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
Before we get started on that, I want to remind everybody, even though the intended use has been discussed already, we have to, if we're doing a rezone, if we rezone to the zone that's being requested and the use is immaterial, you have to look at the totality of everything that's allowed in that zone as you think about whether or not this is a good rezone. Now, any questions of staff?
This current property, is it presently on the tax roll?
We would have to check the property assessor, but being that it is a church, I would say they have a tax exempt status.
Would that status change if it is going to this potential new business?
As long as they did not qualify for that type of tax exemption. Ms. Smith probably can help me out there from a assessor standpoint a little bit.
No, I agree with what you said, Tim. That's, correct.
Yes. Chances are it would be on the tax rolls unless they did have their tax exempt status.
Okay, just a comment. I don't know if this pertains to this particular property or not, or maybe this may not be relevant. If it's not, tell me as I get started. I had received a phone call probably a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, or excuse me, as a text message from an individual that's concerned about a piece of property that was going to be potentially zoned for a sports bar and a club on the King College Road. Now, with what we're seeing here, I don't see that on this particular property, although it could allow for such in the future if it's not developed to what's in front of us. Is that correct?
It could be used for a full service restaurant. Yes. The property.
But isn't that true of all the surrounding property too?
All the B1Bs can be used for full service.
It can happen on either side of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I have.
What other questions do we have? Is there anybody from the public that wants to discuss this, Tim?
Yes, we have the trustee for the Cornerstone Chapel, Mr. Flynn, will be speaking here in a moment. Mr. Blankenship will take him to the public participation computer. Also in attendance are Cody Boring and Laura Martirano. I'll butcher her name all day long. I'm sorry about that, Laura. but they do not wish to speak, only if needed. So,
All right. So we do have somebody that is going to be addressing us.
yes, Mr. Walter Flynn, he's the trustee of the Cornerstone Chapel, the property owner, or the church that's on the property currently. He is the trustee.
All right.
And
Let's get Mr. Flynn up.
You're good, Mr. Chairman. He's good to go.
All right. Mr. Flynn, if you do not mind, please address the Planning Commission and give us your name and address for the record.
My name is Walter Flynn. My address is 21217 Ebony Lane, Abingdon, Virginia.
Thank you, sir. Did you have a statement that you wanted to make to the Planning Commission?
Yes, I would like to give you a little bit of background and share with you what, for your benefit, why what we believe in God's providence, that this is, first of all, it's God's property. So we're concerned about God's will in his property. And we believe that this has turned out this way to carry on the work of Cornerstone. A little bit of history about Cornerstone. It was developed, the church group met in King College years ago and purchased the property in 1989. At that time, they were in an interdenominational church. An unfortunate thing happened that the pastor contracted cancer and had to leave the church and subsequently died. And so the church sort of dwindled down and had to restart their efforts. They brought in a pastor and actually reconstituted the church and had a very vibrant ministry there. Unfortunately, we lost the pastor again. We were back in that state, and the people didn't feel like that it was such an effort, because most churches of this Baptist orientation are smaller churches, and it would have been another struggle for them to try to carry on the church as opposed to just disband to other churches. I came to the church in 2009, and since that time, it's been my privilege to be the caretaker of the property as well as part of the ministry. Children have been very special to us as a church and training them. And I had the privilege of conducting sessions with them during the week. On Sunday, we would have them in Sunday school to teach them God's word in his Bible. And during the week, I used the opportunity to put that into practice. And we did this through the use of the grounds and the property, as well as just teaching character-based. And the reason I'm telling you this is that working with children isn't always effective in a room, out doing something that interests them and puts them in a natural setting is very important. So we were delighted when we had the opportunity to see this property being repurposed as a children's counseling center for that use. The property does have 2.7 acres. It does give some use of the property for a very unique opportunity for a counseling center that most other locations would not provide. And I think this would be an asset to the community and a continuation of what has been so important to the church.
We appreciate that. Is there any questions of Mr. Flynn?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Curious about the ownership of the property. Will that be transferred to a new group or to a new association, or how does that handle?
Well,
No, I've been a elected trustee of the property, and I've been authorized by our Board of Elders to enter a contract with the counseling center and to transfer the property to them.
Okay, thank you.
That is consistent with our bylaws and the Tennessee Code.
Okay, so then to answer Dr. Webb's question, it is going to be sold then.
Yes, we are under contract.
Very good. Is there going to be any aspect of child daycare?
Not to my knowledge. There was another party interested in the property, and they also applied to you for a permit. We had not come to a contract with them, and so they no longer have an interest in the property. I think this is also unique in the sense that we're very delighted to see this property being repurposed, and it appears to be in your interest to do the rezoning for that area so that it would accommodate that.
All right. Any other questions? Hearing none, Mr. Flynn, we're going to thank you very much for appearing in front of us. Mr. Beavers, I assume there's nobody else to address us?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
All right, then we'll bring it back for a motion.
I move to approve.
I missed it. Was that Scott?
Yeah, that was me. Sorry, that was Scott.
All right, and the second is from
Kevin will second.
Kevin is the second.
Thank you.
You know, we didn't get into the discussion. Is Mr. Flynn still around?
He is back in the conference room.
Can he hear us?
I would assume that he's back in there. Yes, sir.
Dr. Webb, if you would explain the rezoning process.
Mr. Flynn, the Planning Commission does not rezone. We make recommendations to the City Council about the rezoning request. It will go from here, the vote will go from here on to City Council, and they have the final approval.
And so that would be in front, assuming that, well, if he gets a favorable recommendation, well, he gets either recommendation, it goes in front of City Council at their meeting next month for first reading consideration. That being said, we've got a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any further discussion? The motion is to accept staff's recommendation. Roll call.
Kelly Graham,
Yes.
Malin Luttrell,
Yes.
Joel Staten is yes. Jason Boer,
Yes.
Kevin Buck,
Yes.
Kevin. Thank you. Scott Gaynor,
Yes.
Takai.
Yes.
Thank you. Mark Webb,
Absolutely.
Margaret Fire-Robin.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate it. Next up on the agenda is preliminary and final plat.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Up for consideration is a subdivision plat for the Cox Ayers property. Applicants Rick Morrow and Shane, if you can promote Mr. Morrow to a panelist from the attendee, that would be appreciated. He is via Zoom with us tonight. And if you recall, this property was before Planning Commission for the Dollar Tree and medical clinic on it out off Ajiro Drive. And this is a subdivision associated with that development. So with that, I'll let Ms. Young give the presentation.
Thank you. This one will look very familiar to you all as we just reviewed the concept plan for this project just a couple months ago. But the request here is for a preliminary and final plat approval for approximately 4.64 acres of property that's located at Highway 394 and Ajero Drive, and the property is zoned B3. If you go to the next slide, Tim, this shows the property where the Dollar Tree and Fast Pass Health Clinic was approved. The concept plan was approved just a few planning commission meetings ago. The next slide, this shows the overall view of the plat. And then if you zoom in, or I'm sorry, next slide will show a zoom in of what they're proposing to do. So they will create 3 lots here. Lot 1, 1.67 acres, lot 2, 0.76 acres, and then lot 3, I think that one's 2.21 acres. So this will have a 3-lot subdivision here at the corner of Highway 394 and Ajero Drive. We'll talk just a little bit about the criteria for the plat approval starting on the next slide. There are water and sanitary sewer services that are available. Electric service is available. The proposed lots do meet the lot size requirements and density requirements of the zoning ordinance. Staff reviewed the plat and it does meet the requirements of the subdivision regulations. And then as far as ingress and egress goes, access is provided off of Ajero Drive. And there is an internal cross-access easement that's proposed across the front and rear of lots 1 and 2, so that lot 3 does have access to Ajero Drive. The staff recommendation tonight is for the Bristol Municipal Regional Planning Commission to grant preliminary and final approval for this plat, the Cox Ayers and RNC Enterprises subdivision plat. Noting conformance to the subdivision regulations as well as the Bristol, Tennessee zoning ordinance. I'm happy to answer any questions. And then we have Mr. Rick Morrow on the electronic call that can answer anything. He is the developer for the project who you all met a couple meetings ago when the concept plan for the Dollar Tree and Fast Pass Health Clinic was approved.
Questions of staff?
I have a question. The southern part of the lot line there that joins 394, is that no man's land right there?
This is Rick Morrow. Yes, sir. It pretty much is. It apparently was related to some topography issues, drainage issues when the state did that. That's the state property line back in there, and we've talked to them, but there's really no nothing from the state as far as being willing to do that.
Who would maintain that? That's right in front of your property there. I could see that could be, a maintenance issue.
Yes, sir. Well, like I say, it's state property, so there's nothing really we can do with it. The state obviously is responsible for maintaining their right of ways, but sometimes they don't do a real good job with it. But
I was going to say that I hope that doesn't harm your businesses in there.
We certainly hope not. Also, we were concerned about it and did inquire about a transfer of that ownership and straightening out the property line. But I think that's going to take an act of Congress from what we saw.
I understand.
Rick, if you don't mind, for the record, give us your name and address, please.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Rick Morrow, 901 West Main Street, Hohenwald, Tennessee.
Thank you, sir. All right. Any additional questions for staff? Any additional questions for Mr. Morrow? You're making it easy. All right. Is there a motion?
I so move we accept staff's recommendation on this subdivision.
Is there a second? Who seconded?
Margaret.
Margaret. We have a motion and a second to accept staff's recommendation is on the floor. Is there any discussion on said motion? Roll call.
Kelly Graham,
Yes.
Malin Luttrell,
Yes.
Joel Staten is yes. Jason Boer,
Yes.
Scott, Kevin Buck,
Yes.
Scott Gaynor,
Yes.
Takai Shu,
Yes.
Mark Webb,
Yes.
Margaret Fire Robin.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Next up, right-of-way abandonment. Is Metzger in the house?
Oh, Mr. Metzger's off for a couple of days, so you have to put up with me tonight instead of David. He deeply misses it, and he misses where he can draw on the board. So drive him a little crazy on Zooms since he can't sketch real easily on there. But up for consideration, Mr. Chairman, is a right-of-way abandonment for Leona Street. Leona Street's off East State. You can see Georgia Avenue, if I can get my pointer, but Georgia Avenue's in this intersections here. Leona Street would be the next intersection to the east. Currently, Leona comes down, makes a 90-degree bend, the actual open part of the road where there's a city street. This portion highlighted in yellow is a unopened right-of-way, so it is a platted right-of-way that does not have a city street on it. Mr. Kenneth Dunn owns both properties adjacent to that right-of-way, and he has requested that the city abandon this portion of the right-of-way so he can construct a home in that area and meet setback requirements. He's going to build a home out on these properties, spanning several the other two properties. This map is just more of a schematic of that. The only comment we had back from a review from BTS and utility companies and staff was BTS does have a transmission line across the front of the property here and wish to retain a 15-foot utility easement across this front portion of the property here, the southern portion. This is a photo where the dozer setting is where that right-of-way, unopened right-of-way is. You can see the line up top, the phone line. That's obviously not an electrical line up there, Joel. So, but the phone line.
I wasn't going to say anything.
So, but anyway, this is the portion that is requesting being abandoned. Staff, like I said, has reviewed it, have spoken with utility companies, and would recommend the Planning Commission send a favorable recommendation to the City Council for abandonment of the Leona Street right-of-way, and including the provision of retaining a 15-foot utility easement along the southern portion of the abandonment. Should Planning Commission pass out a favorable recommendation, this will be placed on City Council's November 10th meeting. They did move the council meeting to November 10th. It will be placed on the November 10th meeting under a resolution for abandonment. If y'all have any questions, I'll try my best to answer them.
Tim, that old water tank that's there close to it, will that be coming down or is it going to remain as is?
Let me get that picture up. There is an old water tank. You can see the edge of it right here. That's private, and that used to be part of the tanning factory's fire suppression system a long time ago, at the turn of the early 1900s. So Mr. Dunn does own that. I think my understanding is he will be removing that out of the property. But that is, like I said, early 1900s, served the tanning factory that used to Slaughter's tanning factory down in there.
Oh, good.
Any other questions? Is all of this property in Tennessee?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. Do we have anybody that's going to address us?
No, sir. There are no further public participants tonight.
And you say he's going to build a private residence on that property, Tim?
Yes, sir. He owns the bigger piece, and let me get my pointer started. I don't know if this slide or, but he owns this bigger piece and the landscaping company that operates out of it, and he's going to build his residence up here in this area. So he will be doing a recombination plat should the right of way be abandoned, and put his residence up in this area.
Is there a motion?
Motion to
Go ahead.
motion to approve the abandonment right of way as discussed.
Second.
I'm going to assume that motion is to accept staff's recommendation as printed out in our handout.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Is there any discussion on the motion? Roll call.
Kelly Graham,
Yes.
Madeline Luttrell,
Yes.
Joel Staton is yes. Jason Boer,
Yes.
Kevin Buck,
Yes.
Scott Gaynor,
Yes.
Takai Shu,
Yes.
Mark Webb. Mark,
Yes.
thank you. Margaret Fire Robin.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. The next item up on the Metzger agenda is a street name change.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Up next is a private street name change of Center Drive. This private street is located off Highway 394. The center, it used to be the Elks Lodge at one time, I think, years ago, but it's off Highway 421. And you can see it's just Center Drive right now. And the request is to change it from Center Drive to Crest Point Drive from the electric motor has made that request. And one reason they have made the request is the new Center Point 74 development, which is when Island Road gets relocated out off 11W, which is to name that road instead of Island Road Northeast, to name it Center Point Drive out there. So that couldn't have two center drives and a Center Point Drive in the same location. The electric motor determined that they like Crest Point Drive out there, since this is no longer the center, as used to be a meeting place you could rent. And they agreed to change their name to Crest Point Drive. But once again, should you all choose to make a recommendation, a favorable recommendation to City Council on the private road name change, this will go to City Council at their November 10th meeting for changing the name with an effective date of December 31st, 2020. And the reason this late of date after approval of a resolution would be to allow the business that is in operation out there to change their address, get their address changed. So it gives them time to get all that taken care of before the name change becomes effective. With that, I'll answer any questions.
Questions? Anybody from the public?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Motion?
Move to approve. Take staff recommendation for the name change from Center Drive to Crest Point Drive.
Thank you,
I'll
ma'am.
second it.
We have a motion and we do have a second. Is there any discussion on the motion that's on the floor? Roll call.
Kelly Graham,
Yes.
Malin Luttrell,
Yes.
Joel Staton is yes. Jason Boer,
Yes.
Mark Webb,
Yes.
Kevin Buck,
Yes.
Scott Gaynor,
Yes.
Takai Shu,
Yes.
Margaret Fire
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Other matters, city council update.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, at the last city council meeting earlier this month, city council did approve on second reading after having a public hearing, the rezoning of the old Sunset Motel property, a portion of it from R3 to B3 that would become effective the 23rd. So it would be Friday that rezoning will become effective. And that is all for the city council update.
Thank you, sir. Next up is the discussion of the RE district.
Yes, Mr. Council, or Mr. Chairman, Mr. Councilman, Mr. Chairman, up is a continued discussion of the RE district draft. Staff did go and look at that and make changes per our last planning commission meeting. It is in what we'll call not a final version, but the final draft. There's a couple items we still would like some clarification to make sure you all are comfortable with before we create the final language in the ordinance update. So with that, I'll let Ms. Young give the presentation.
All right, thank you, Tim. So we, staff has held quite a few little sessions on how to try to attack this RE district based on your all's feedback during the last meeting and work session. And so what we have produced for you all to look at tonight is just trying to kind of narrow down. It's definitely in a draft format, but try to narrow down on some of these points we've discussed to get this to a clean and concise regulation. So what I have tonight is just a couple screens, and this is the red line copy of the changes we came up with that I'd like to walk through and just get your input and have you tell us where we still need to do some work before we would bring this back to you in a format and ask you to make any kind of recommendation on it. So this, what we'll walk through is the entirety of this RE section, and we'll just show you where we've made some changes, and then some things are just really cleanup. We tried to, while we've got this thing open, tried to do as much cleanup as we could on it to make it more concise. So we'll start with this section A, which is the purpose section we discussed so much during that last work session and meeting. And so what we did is really just struck through this first paragraph that was kind of giving us some pause over what certain terms meant. And really just tried to write it concisely to say that the intent of this district is to preserve the development patterns of existing neighborhoods that meet the following criteria or conditions. So that is a new sentence that just tries to straightforwardly set out that this district is to preserve the development patterns of existing neighborhoods that meet the following criteria or conditions. The A, B, and C underneath is the criteria that's existing in the ordinance now. So this is the criteria that they use to help determine and draw boundaries around what would be the two RE districts that we have. So A, we just really chose to use the term lots rather than parcels. So at least 85% of the lots developed prior to 1950. B, we say that the district shall contain at least one full block length or 10 lots lying within 300 feet of each other. And then we add this phrase that says, unless contiguous with an existing RE district. And the purpose of that phrase would be if ever there was consideration to expand the existing RE districts. And we have there's no active talk to do that. No one's actively presented that to us, but just in the instance that that could ever happen, that phrase would allow that those districts to be expanded. And then C just says that a majority of the developed lots are less than 7,500 square feet. That exists in the ordinance now. So then the final sentence in that section ties back to the first, which says that the intent of the district is to preserve the development patterns. So we wanted to say, we don't want anyone to say, what do you mean by development patterns? Well, the term development patterns for the purpose of the RE district is defined as lot size, building placement regulations, lot coverage, building height, and orientation pattern. And those are the elements that are further laid out in the ordinance below. So how does everybody feel about that big first purpose section?
Does that orientation pattern address the problem we have now going on?
I believe it does.
That would address that. Okay.
Right. And we'll go through that section here in just a minute as we work our way through. But for the purpose of development patterns, that's what we're talking about.
Okay.
Yes, the terms you see in this sentence for the definition are defined further below on the next page. You'll see those headings, building placement, regulations, lot coverage, building height, and orientation pattern. So when you get down to the next pages, you will see those terms. And we were trying to be consistent with what's in the regulation using those terms. So there couldn't be a mistake to interpret differently. And the biggest thing on this, if everybody comfortable with that? I mean, that seems to be concise, more concise.
Well, I have a comment about this new preamble. I mean, that's completely different than the original. You know, the original wasn't to preserve anything. It was just to make the zoning or this area, these areas that were not uniform because there was no zoning, to make them a classification without saying, okay, anything that comes after this, or if anything gets built or changed, has to suddenly conform. And so, I mean, that's different. The other thing I have a little bit of reservation on is this use of the word preserve. You know, these are usually in these historic districts. And I think people will interpret that as, well, see, look, you said preserve, nothing can change. Everything's got to stay the same. You know, I just, you know, you got to use the same building materials, all that stuff. And I just think that is very different than the original purpose of the RE district.
Mr. Beavers, is the term development patterns defined? You said it was defined later on.
The term development pattern is down here at the bottom. The term development pattern for the purposes of the RE district is defined as lot size, building placement regulations, and those are in the pages down below, the items down below. So each of these terms, lot size, building placement, lot coverage, building height, and orientation pattern, are down in the regulation below on the next pages. So there's a clear tie back to this definition of here's what we mean by development pattern.
Well, considering the fact that there are some definitions for the terms that are included in the definition or the description of development patterns, having the opportunity to look at those shortly would make my conclusion on what staff has worked on. It's much more definitive. It's less ambiguous, and it gets right to the point. And I have no problem with the change.
And we can move down to the biggest question, and she hasn't touched on it yet, and I'm sort of still in Sheriff's thunder here, but all our, I think, Sheriff, if I'm saying this right, all our R1, R2, RE have these special use permits allowed in those zones. And our question to you all, we haven't really talked about this as Planning Commission, but are you all comfortable leaving those as special use permits, all those uses in the RE? Like, or do you want to take something out or add something? I mean, the one we seem to talk about lots is private golf, swimming, tennis, and sports clubs. That's my bigger question for you all on this slide right now is to, from a special use permit standpoint, are y'all still comfortable leaving those in the RE zone? That's how all the other residential zones have those, the single families, duplex.
I personally like those because any residential area would benefit from those types of establishments, I would think.
Other thoughts?
I think the golf, swimming, tennis, similar sports clubs, I mean, that would severely change the character of these neighborhoods. I mean, all these lots are small, right? You know, they're less than 7,500 square feet. So I'm not sure how you have a golf course with 7,500 square feet, unless you buy up dozens of lots, which, like I said, will change the character of the neighborhood significantly. Same with swimming or a tennis club. I mean, you can put a couple tennis courts maybe on one parcel, but that's it.
Other members' thoughts?
So along those lines, for if we wanted to add pocket parks or small parks, would those need to be special use permit, or if they were, and I guess looking whether they could be public or private, do they need to be permitted?
Well, I think if they were parks, like the true sense, there are green space associated with a development. I don't, Danielle, you can help me out here, but I don't think that would be something we'd have to call out specifically, would it?
I don't believe that we call out parks as a use. I could be mistaken, but I don't know that that's something that we'd have by special use permit anywhere in the ordinance. It's just, and you fall back on the idea that the sovereign can do what it wants, and for the most part. So if the city says we're going to put a park in here, a pocket park, then and acquires the property, it becomes a pocket park.
Okay.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I see a situation over here next to Anderson School where a lot that had a house on it was torn down, and I think Civitan Club put in a basketball court, you know, on that lot. This could happen, correct? Say next to the Fairmount Elementary School, if somebody donated a lot, a park could go in there, or a tennis court, or a basketball goal, couple of basketball goals. Is that correct?
Danielle, you want to, if it's a private, I think if it was something private, it would have to.
No, not private. I think, like I say, Civitan Club donated, you know.
They donated the land to the city, I think, the one at Anderson.
Yeah.
Now that I've looked, I misspoke earlier when I said that public parks aren't really addressed. What actually, the way the zoning ordinance handles that is public parks are permitted in all zones except this one, oddly, because the way that it works is that if you look at the RM zone, those are permitted, uses, public parks in the RM zone. And I think Sheriff and Tim can correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the other residential zones then fall back on that RM district and say any use that's permitted in RM is also permitted in this residential zone. But the RE district does not do that. It is different. And so that may be something that we want to address. If we want to allow for public parks, we may want to specifically allow for public parks.
Yes, I would suggest if we want to allow for public parks to put it under B, permitted uses.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how did the Rotary Field project, how did that play into this? I mean, was it because it was already there, or would it play into it?
Rotary Field is not in this district, so it's not in the RE zone, I don't believe. Sheriff, is it the softball field?
I don't believe so.
And if it was developed prior to the the adoption of the RE zone.
Okay.
So, but is everybody comfortable with putting public parks in the under B? A nod, thumbs up, something.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
That sounds like we'll add that. Now going back to the special use permits, is everybody comfortable with taking out private golf, swimming, tennis, and similar sports clubs? Nods, thumbs up, something I can see.
Yes.
Are we talking about private tennis courts?
Yes.
All this private
sports club, private clubs.
Okay.
Not like if a resident wanted to go out and put their own tennis court in.
Or what we just talked about, a park with a tennis court in it.
That would be a public park. You could put that in. Yes.
We're talking about private everything here on.
Yeah, it would be a club, a sports club, a private club. Okay, we'll take that out of special use. Is everybody, how about the institutions, philanthropic institutions and clubs?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, leave that in. Daycare centers, leave in. Everybody nods, thumbs, something.
Yeah.
Okay. Churches, I assume everybody's happy with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And then obviously the utilities. There's not many private utilities, but obviously those are statements and typically in all our zones about the public or private utilities. Okay, so what I have on special use is to take out number 5. And then on the number B is add public parks. Okay, now we'll go, Jason. This will help you out when we get down in here some more, and everybody else. There you go. Sure.
Hold on, I didn't get really an answer of why we're changing this purpose, because that purpose is not what was there. It's totally different.
We were trying to make it where there's not any question of what it means by defining development pattern, as you'll see in the next slide, as down in the further in the slides here. So in other words, there's nothing like before. There wasn't any definition to characteristic or the things that are hatched out up there. There wasn't patterns, character. There wasn't any of that defined. So what we did when we looked at it, we tried to come up with a term and just use development patterns as that term, because that's typically.
Yeah, but that's not my, I mean, I understand that, but the original point was to accommodate a diversity of land development and setbacks and everything else. That's different than preserve. I mean, accommodate, I mean, it's like trying, I mean, you're trying to take a hodgepodge of different things and say, okay, this zoning ordinance covers these things because they're all different. And now we're saying, well, no, we want to preserve this. I mean, that's a very different statement. And, you know, I know I'm being a little pedantic about it, but, you know, we saw what happened when it went to the zoning board, you know, and they interpreted it however they wanted. And this is a quote historic district, and I'm afraid that people will see that word preserve and ignore everything else and say, well, no, it's got to be exactly how it was.
So Scott, I think, I mean, personally, I don't agree with you. I think it was, the original purpose was to preserve the character of the neighborhood. I don't have a problem using the terminology preserve. So.
Well, I'm reading the text above it. I mean, it doesn't say anything about preserve. It says to accommodate those homes that were developed prior to 1950.
Tim, can we see the terminology defined as you were getting ready to go to? I think that would help eliminate the subject.
We'll run on down through the terminology. Okay, Sheriff, there's the next slide.
Okay, so I'll just speak to the red lines, but the section D is really just a cleanup. You have a lot of words here to say, existing language to say essentially what we've crossed out to say one single family detached unit or one duplex is permitted per lot. So from a residential lot development, that's what you can do here. So we felt that in kind of the way that this number one is laid out, you could say it in less words. So it's saying one single family detached unit or one duplex is permitted per lot. This is really a cleanup item. Number 3 down here, though, is where you get to some of the issues we've discussed. And this is going to talk about residential orientation pattern. And residential orientation pattern is one of those items that's listed as a development pattern in that defining statement in the purpose section. So residential orientation pattern is one of those items. And so this is trying to address how the structure faces the street. So it's going to say structure orientation for new structures and front yard additions. The residential front facade shall face the street. The residential front facade shall have an entryway. Oh, uh-oh. Did I do that?
Well, just going down through here and we can.
Okay. Okay, and then we're going to eliminate the heading setbacks, and we're going to say, here are your building placement regulations. And we're going to say you have a front yard build to range. So the front yard build to range is determined by the nearest adjacent existing structure on the same side of the street, oriented towards the same public street. New homes and front yard additions can have a build to range that is, and there's 2 diagrams that we'll look at here, but this is talking about a new construction, new home or front yard addition has this range that it can be built no less than the adjacent residential front facade referenced in comparison to the street. So no closer to this existing residential structure on the right, if you look at the diagram. So if your neighbor's built here, this establishes your front minimum. So that's, or I guess that's the, yeah, that'd be the minimum front yard build to line. And then this section B says you can't build no greater than the reference residential front facade referenced in comparison to, no greater than the referenced residential front facade referenced in comparison to the street. So no greater. So if you have a home where Tim's got the pointer right now, sitting back this far, your new construction needs to go somewhere in between the 2 of these. Or it can match.
Once again, we can come back and speak to these. I just think going to for everybody.
Keep going. Okay, so this section says this addresses. So if you are a corner lots will reference most adjacent residential front facade on the same side of the street oriented towards the public street. But you can deviate 5 feet from it. The rest of the section is about minimum side yard and rear cleanup. So we say Minimum side yard setbacks, minimum yard setbacks shall be 5 feet. Minimum yard setbacks shall be 30 feet. And section F just means that just covered porches and step back exceptions. They can encroach past the front the average encroachment distance of steps or porches is determined by those those on lots within 300 feet of the subject property. Then you go to lot coverage, which we left the same. Building height left the same. Really, next area words which ever that it would be says building height. Peak of roof shall be 35 feet in the height of the principal building at grade front side, not exceed full from 1 act when a gate or hip. And then finally, section 7 is talking about duplex unit, and this is when we really feel how see this. This section contains education of the language that's in the parking section. So we would advise striking A, B, and C as a and if you look at the new A, which parking is to be placed in the rear structure and may not place in the of the side or the structure. We still feel that we should still include that. So it's important to say that the duplex parking is to be in the rear structure. Should we keep that? That's still important. And additional drive-through, which is probably 11 feet long. This section actually access standards and access standards minimum maximum for residential and commercial. So that makes sense to have some additional parking. That entrance shall be we'll have it addressed in another. Other
So, and I go here and letter and clarify. We can scroll back down to that up is the pattern. Here's the patterns and the ordinance of those. Once again, yet does everybody feel more comfortable preserve use a preserve accommodate felt more comfortable using preserve, but this I'm playing like y'all can see. Keep your eyes closed about this. What to do development patterns are and those
Has done this is not it takes a lot of you for that, and I think good reason why we started. You've put preciseness.
I think that what we talk about with development is when you put a new structure, a new to the lot structure, because that's when you would require a site plan, regardless of whether you're moving the structure from somewhere else. Because I guess a similar example would be one of the houses that they've built down at the Speedway and moved into place on a
Right.
Tim, those we've required a site plan for, have we not?
Well, all residential has to have a plot sketch.
They have to have something that we can review to make sure that it meets all of the requirements of the zoning ordinance. And so
Right.
a structure constructed elsewhere, whether it's in a factory or, at the Speedway, is going to have to go through that same process.
Okay. I was just covering bases here.
Right.
To Scott's point, I think there is an implication to using the word preserve rather than accommodate, insofar as if someone goes into an established block and builds a steel and glass house that meets all of the other requirements, someone's going to bring up, well, that doesn't look like ours. We're not preserving the neighborhood. And apparently the zoning board may pick up on that. I think accommodating would be a lot less likely to be abused in that way.
Is everybody good with accommodate? Thumb, shake, something?
Yes.
Using
Sure.
both.
Yes.
Okay. It looks like the majority of people will change that to accommodate. And everybody, besides that, is everybody comfortable with this section knowing, and we'll start talking down below the next sections to make sure, but to see the intent of what we did was to, development patterns, here's what they mean. Everybody comfortable? Looks, nods, thumbs, something. Okay.
Yeah, I think it simplifies it.
Okay, great. Now let's talk, the one, I guess, Sheriff and I would point out on this, the first one, number one, is just a cleanup of the language. There was no need to have two A and B there when it could be covered under one sentence. And we haven't really talked about the residential lot sizes, but we did not propose any changes unless somebody wants to change something there. These are typical of what we have seen out there and looking at the majority of the lots. This one, just make sure people are comfortable with this, what we're calling the residential orientation pattern. The residential front facade shall face the street, and the residential front facade shall have an entryway. I mean, that's, and then there was a definition, Danielle, that we were going to put in for front facade. I believe that we didn't show on the slides.
I thought we had it, and it may have gotten lost in a revision, but I'll see if I can find it in a previous draft.
Yeah,
As I recall, that was a circular argument that the residential front facade is the facade that is in the front.
Yeah, we worked pretty hard on that definition, Kevin.
Why we took it out of this version, Danielle, is because the definition was really this right here, just like Kevin said, it was sort of circular argument. So, but is everybody comfortable with that?
I think that can be abused by someone who wants to claim that the front of the house is on the side.
Okay. So
If there's not a distinguishing characteristic,
right,
other than entryway, then just say that the entryway is on the front.
we'll go back and look at that definition that we had before. It was like I said, you look at it so many times as staff, you cut out things and add it, but we'll go back and look at that to clarify that. But in general, what we want to say, staff's intent would be the front facade is the facade that faces the street. I mean, that's just that simple. And then the front facade shall have an entryway. I mean, that's,
I think that's clean.
yeah, that's what our intent is. If everybody's comfortable with that, we'll make that happen.
Is it, I was, but rather than saying the residential front facade shall face the street, the residential front facade is the one that faces the street.
Yeah. We had a definition. I really think it got cut out, but what we had it was the residential front facade is defined as the face of the residential structure facing a city street.
Yeah, we'll go back and clean this up if everybody's comfortable with those two being your orientation pattern.
I believe there's a typo on 2.
Yeah.
Whereas,
and.
It should say and way instead of and.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm glad. I'm trying to read it real quick, but as long as Danielle sees it and Cherith, we've got it.
And Tim, my question is on the residential orientation pattern. How would it handle rebuilt structures?
We'll add that in for renovation. Well,
okay.
Well, I guess that's the front yard addition. So, I mean, that's what the intent was. The front yard addition would be your renovations if you expanded.
Okay, that's, and I wanted to get some clarification on something that's either destroyed by fire or something that was rebuilt, but.
Right. Oh, for rebuilds?
Yes.
They'd have to meet these requirements, wouldn't they, Danielle?
Unless you built in an exception for a structure that, like in the case of the structure that was destroyed by fire, if you want to be able to rebuild it to the same orientation that it was previously in, we could create an exception for something like that.
And the question I'd have if we did that would be, would you put a time frame on that rebuild?
I would.
Yeah.
I don't know what it would be yet. We can talk about that, but
we'll talk through it. But we can do that, Takai. We can look at putting something in there about that to clarify it.
Okay, cool.
I got a comment about the corner lot. It says facing the street is the majority of the homes on the block. Well, which block? You got 2 streets. Yeah, I think because
we'll fix it. Then 10 is,
yeah, you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, we'll fix it.
Yeah, I mean, it might just be simpler to say that, you know, it faces the street, one of the streets.
We'll fix it because we looked at that on a couple of different instances on some corner lots, how they face, but we'll clarify that better.
Yeah, because I know there are some houses that, you know, they just, for what, you know, they don't follow what you would think would be the main street, but they turn to the other one, and you know, it just suddenly they become non-conforming, right?
Correct. Well,
obviously grandfathered, but yeah, okay.
We'll clean that up. All right. Moving on. Now, what staff did, this topic, setbacks, will be our, and we talked about this last time. Staff went back and we looked at the RE zones and we'd ask about anomalies. There were 3 anomalies, and really they were in the Windsor Avenue weed and seed area. At 1410 Anderson Street, there was a home that set back much further than the other homes on the street, but it was built in 1940. So it was built at the same time the other homes were built. So I don't know how you can call it an anomaly because it was constructed in that same time frame as the other homes that are adjacent to it. Then we had one at 925 Wilson Avenue, and it was similar. It was built in 1952. So once again, you're back in that same time frame as that development of that neighborhood. And then the only more recent anomaly is 1120 Shelby Street, and that home was built in 1974. So we really have no recent anomalies. So our intent with this and writing the reg this way was, if you had an anomaly, say this was one of the old anomalies, this structure right here, because it's set back the furthest, then if that was your build to range, you know, you could, as a property owner, soften that anomaly. I wouldn't say it's hard to call it an anomaly when it was developed at the time the others were. It just, they felt they wanted to build it back there, and there was no regulations that said otherwise, but it's the same time frame of home. But like I said, there's only those 3 instances. So everything else, you have a neighbor. And we said the easiest from a regulatory standpoint is to go look at the home, most adjacent home to you, the closest home to you on both sides, and say you can build no closer than the closest one to the road or to the front yard line, or no further than the furthest one closest to you. And that gives you a build to range, and that is very easy for anybody to go out there and determine fairly quickly versus average setback lines. And because, I mean, it just, to us, this made the most sense. One, because there were only the 3 homes that were built back further than you would call a typical pattern at that time. But it's hard to say why they did that, but it was allowed. So there were only those 3 instances. There were none in the Fairmount area that we could see. There's some on Taylor Street that set back further than some of the others. But if you look at them, they're sort of do this. Like you might have one here, and then the next one's halfway, and then the next one's back further. So it's not a drastic jump back to them. But we felt this was the most enforceable from a staff standpoint and easiest for us to go and tell somebody and explain to them when they call up and ask, what's my setback? To call that the build to range. And so that's why we proposed that. I mean, we went everything, we beat this issue for hours and hours and hours trying to look at different scenarios, but from an enforceability standpoint. And just because, once again, you have those 3 structures, it's all that's in here in these zones currently RE that set back further than, way further than the other homes in these districts. And 2 of them were built in the same time frame back in the 40s and early 50s, 1940 and 1952. And I'd have to say the 74, while built earlier, that's still, it's not yesterday. So 74 is a long time ago. Is everybody comfortable with this method?
Yeah.
Okay. And similar for the corner lot, since you don't have a neighbor here, and this block may be different than this block, we said, well, let's give them a 5-foot deviation. So you could set your home back further if you wanted to, at least 5 foot. We felt that wasn't a lot of deviation to let somebody have, but it could be enough to give some a little more interest than looking at a straight row on a corner, especially. Plus, it might preserve some sight distance issues for people if their home weren't built up as close as their neighbors. So, is everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Okay. We didn't really change the setbacks on the side and rear. Really the building height, we just tried to clean that up. It was a little confusing, whichever is less, but basically what this says is you can't have anything over 2 stories and a 1 attic or half story with a gable or hip roof. So you can't go over 35 foot high, and you can't have 3 stories. So you can have 2 stories with an attic, or 2 stories or a half story, 2.5 stories, whatever they call those. But that basically the main impetus would be nothing over 35 feet high in the development, and 2 stories for the most part. And
do we have, oh, sorry.
You could have an attic over 2 stories, but it would have to be within a gable or hip roof. So you can't just have another story and then put a roof on top of it.
Do we have any houses over 35 feet?
Yes.
I think there's one on Maryland, 405 or so. I think that one's 3 stories at least.
There's a few. Most of them were the 2.5, with the attic room. The majority of them were that less than 35 feet.
Would that 35 feet be measured from, say, the front of the house, or where? And the reason I'm asking, if you have a, slanted driveway going down, you could be taller than 35 feet.
It's at the average grade of the front facade. So
Okay.
it's measured from the street view, looking at it from the street.
Okay.
Your yard, if it dropped off, then certainly it could have a basement under it or something.
Okay.
From the rear. So
good.
Trying to preserve, or trying to accommodate the front, the view from the street. And then the last thing we debated hard was, if you look and drive around, every block has a hodgepodge of parking patterns on it. There's not one consistent, unless they have a retaining wall in the front along the street, then they rear load, and that's a few blocks. But other than that, if they don't have a retaining wall, there's a hodgepodge of parking and access points to the homes on the same block. So our question, and those that were on planning commission back then, is why the restriction on, if it's a duplex, you have to park in the back? And then this second one, like I said, it's a hodgepodge. So I don't know. To us, we would like to get rid of this whole section on parking and let our access standards dictate the parking driveway requirements. And for a duplex, single family and duplex, the minimum width would be 9 foot, maximum width 24 feet wide on a driveway. And that's our standard parking access. Now, if y'all want to drive around and look and think about this one, let us know your thoughts. But really, once again, unless there's a retaining wall along the road that's hodgepodge of whether they access from the alley, if they park in the rear, if they park in the front, it's just, there's not a consistent pattern with all the blocks out there, except for the ones that have the retaining wall. Most of them do. Just because of that grade change, they do load from an alley in the back.
How about the ones that park on the sidewalks?
Yeah, there's probably plenty of those too. There is an ordinance against parking on the sidewalk, so.
If a duplex had a attached garage, say to the left of the building, and you had a driveway going straight into the garage, so you've got the driveway in front, you got the garage, or what if they wanted to park cars on their driveway out in front of the garage?
Well, that's this section. Like I said, staff's recommendation would be just to delete this entire section. But that's up to planning commission. I mean, that's it's what our asking. Would you mind, the majority of y'all, would you mind if we just deleted this section and let our access standards dictate?
Fine with me.
Yeah.
Okay, looks like the majority's giving me a thumbs up or head nods. Okay. And that's it. I mean, we'll go back and clean those up and try to present you a regulation next time for y'all to consider. If we can't, we'll come back with more questions because like I said, we've met several times to debate this as staff, and I know y'all have worked diligently on this also and appreciate all that work that's gone in there. But our goal is to try to get a nice regulation that does have some accommodations to those areas and is not as ambiguous as the current regulation. So, questions? And thank you, Sheriff, and all the planning staff and Danielle and everybody that has worked on this.
Amen.
Absolutely.
Good job.
All right, we going to move on now?
Yes, sir. If you're
Housing study zoning ordinance updates.
So with this, we'd spoken a little bit last time about some amendments to look at for the B3 areas and multifamily properties. Sheriff, I think I'll steal your thunder and just run through this real quick. We do what we have seen, and you all saw it tonight and have seen it in the past few. And when we look at our multifamilies, especially in the B3, and you can see it, let me get on this slide. Let me see what's showing on TV. You can see it on this slide, the B3. Y'all seen it, and how many months? It seems like every month we're doing a special use permit for multifamily in a B3 or a PBD zone. And the one question, simply easy question, is staff would recommend that we allow single family and duplex uses by right in B3. So we already allow residential uses by right in a B3 zone. Is why not allow multifamily by right in a B3 zone? Is there some reason that we feel multifamily is more intense than a big shopping complex in the B3 zone? Is it, do you want to, I was going to say, you know, one reason maybe you want to preserve the B3 zone from residential use, but with the single family and duplex by right, that sort of takes that argument out unless we took those out of the B3 zone. So first question I would have would, does anybody have any issue with us making the multifamily by right in a B3 zone?
I don't.
Okay, so it looks like we'll try to do something on that.
I don't recall anybody coming in front of us for a special use permit that we had heartburn about.
I don't either, and I don't know why we, like I said, it'd be one thing if you said any residential would have to have a special use, or you just outright didn't allow it in the zone. But with the single family and duplex there, it just didn't make a lot of sense to us.
The only thing is we're giving up the right to say, well, what about this? What about that? And is that something that we want to preserve?
Our staff, when we looked at it, we debated, you know, intensity. So by right, that's our most intense use in a business zone. So you have the Pinnacle things, you know, you did look at that just because it was in the zone it's in. But you could put any of your B3 zones, you could put a big shopping center in those by right, which would be more intense traffic wise, more intense, you know, impervious area wise, just really intense uses that are allowed in the B3 zone. And residential, you know, it is a less intense use from a traffic standpoint than those shopping centers. Now, not during the middle of the night, possibly, depending on when the stores close, but that would be the only thing. I mean, how do you make them, you know, if you wanted to go making residential compatible, you wouldn't have allowed the single family and duplex by right in there.
But what I'm saying is when we do have these in front of us, we'll talk about everything from where the trash containers are going to be placed, what the lighting is like, and the buffering. And we've changed that from what was presented to other things in the past. And we would be giving up the right to do that. And if we're good with that, then we're good with that. But if we're not, we need to talk about that.
But that's part of site plan with staff.
It is. And that's always the final thing, is that it is up to staff. But many times we have tweaked on the request. I'm not sure that I've got a problem with giving it up. I'm just pointing out the fact that in the past, we have tweaked the request because we had the right to.
I think I've seen, and you've been doing it a lot longer than you members have. But the time I've been here, I've seen it more on the special uses than the R3s and a B3. Because there's not really, once again, it's like tonight, you were doing an R3 in the middle of a B3 area, and there really wasn't a screening issue. You know, do you want to? So, I mean, that was our feelings as staff, at least. Like I said, I see it more on special uses where you're getting encroaching maybe into the neighborhoods more than, because you could put, name your big retail development in a B3, it would have to meet the site plan requirements and screening requirements. And that does not become before the board. So that's why our feeling was, why the distinction with a multifamily all of a sudden? And you all were in, you know, some of y'all were here when this may have been written this way. I don't know when it became by special use, but just throwing it out there. I mean, it makes more sense to staff. And Sheriff, I think Kingsport, were they special use? Were they by right on the R3 and B3?
Let me pull that up just a second.
And you might have stuck it in here, but I don't think you did.
No, but I have it right here.
And while she's looking that up, the other question, you can go to this second bullet point here. You know, we've come up with the R4 and R5 zones that's buffers between B3 and residential to sort of some step down zoning. Does anybody have an issue to allow those densities? Right now it's 15 units per acre, which is more than our R3 zone, but less than the R4 zone in the B3. So is there any issue? Does anybody have issue with allowing those higher densities? R4s, how many? Yeah, I had it written down.
R4 is 20.
What's the density of R4, Sheriff?
20 units per acre.
And R5 is
35.
35. Because I don't know where else applicable you would try to stick those densities unless you were, like I said, you typically will see them in your higher use zone areas, your B3 area, which is our most intense use from a business standpoint. Once again, the R4 would be 20 units per acre and R5 would be 35. Is that correct, Sheriff?
Right.
So, I mean, we created these zones, but we have a couple that are zoned R4, but they're not really out in business areas, your B3 areas where they're zoned R4 currently, I do not believe.
No.
So.
What's our requirement for green space or playgrounds or whatever for our multifamily?
Multifamily, well, it's similar to this, I'd imagine, in Earth, the multifamily developments.
Right. It's really in those residential districts somewhat governed by the lot coverage requirements. The planned, shoot, I'm forgetting, the planned residential district has an open space requirement. But that's the only residential district that mandates a certain amount of open space.
I don't.
The others just mandate the maximum lot coverage.
Right. Yeah. More density could be okay, but I think green space requiring child area or whatever would be part of that. So I don't know. I think we ought to look at what other people are doing and what's to have enough green space or play areas for kids to make it a good, healthy, etc. Anyway, and that's overall, not just with this discussion.
Yeah, Tim, I may be off key right here, but when you're talking about 15 units an acre, I mean, the units have to be pretty well standard size or the same as, or I mean, you could have different size units.
Correct. Yes, you could have 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom. We don't dictate the.
But still no more than 15 total
units, right?
Okay.
The densities, when you get to your R4 and R5, you get 60% maximum lot coverage on those R4 and R5 zones versus the 40%.
And your landscape ordinance mandates a certain landscaped area, but it still doesn't get to actual like playgrounds, features like that.
And none of our ordinances require those amenities. And actually your lot coverage, when it says lot coverage, that is occupied by all buildings. So it's only for the buildings. It does not include the driveways and parking areas or anything like that currently in our regulations. So when you say lot coverage, you are specifically talking about the building footprints, the total building footprints on a property. But we don't require anywhere in our ordinances the amount of green space or land like that associated with multifamily developments. Other than it does have landscaping requirements that they have to meet.
Yeah. I think, even on the next page, when you talk about adaptive use vacant properties, like that one on Broad Street that you have there as an example, I think that would probably be over the 15 per acre, right? Something like that.
It's several acres out there. It may be. Not sure. That one's zoned R2. I mean, the difference about that's what it's zoned. So right now it can only be used for.
Yeah, I'm just talking about like a building like that if it was in a B3 or PBD.
Certainly it could be. That's food for thought on the density. One thing we found interesting, if you look at King Sports, is they eliminated setback requirements except for the parent tract. In other words, if you did do something internally, had internal lot lines, they didn't have setback requirements except for the parent tract. We found that to be very interesting to, that allows a lot more flexibility with the sites, especially if you want to have people build closer to the roads with units. That's an opportunity to allow that to happen than to push them back from the road. And the same with building area requirements on those two. And then one that we come up when we're talking residential, even the R3, not necessarily B3, but one consideration is, we talked about this, it's been several months ago, but requiring the units to be attached instead of, if you're on a lot and say somebody wants to have single units, non-attached units, but want to have all the property in common and sell the single units like a condo, horizontal property regime is, that could be enticing to somebody to do that instead of having the units attached. So why the minimum three units attached in multifamily? Why would we consider the detached, just taking the attached part out of the ordinance and letting somebody, if they wanted to do single units detached, let them do the single units detached. I mean, it could still be a multifamily development. Once again, if you start doing individual lots and selling them off, that's a whole different story. Subreg requirements, but in the horizontal property, where all the land was going to be in common ownership, why make them attached to each other is food for thought. And then let me back up this slide.
Tim, on that one, there, one of our continuing education, some of that was pretty interesting. At some point, somebody might want to put the unit together, make it a full one, maybe let it be by the name and be able to detect pretty interesting. I liked it.
For flexibility, like for the family, you some home, the patio, you know, they're common patio or something, but physically detached from each other, the units. Now you have to cover patio or something, get rid of 20 units to allow that happen. I get one thing, we're trying to allow flexibility in some of the developments or flexibility in design. See people with friends, what people are willing to do, to not have some of the older relations typically written. The question here is when could that requirements for residential structure in these zones would be for your, if you decide structure in there. All right, so once again, is to look at these setback requirements. Mainly the front and rear is not as bad, but the side yards, to think about maybe going down to a 5-foot side yard setback on each side for your single families. And what this is, you've got your home builders, your national home builders. They're looking for about 50-foot wide lots by 100-foot deep and 5,000 square foot lots, and they can put a 40-foot wide home on those with the 5 foots on each side. And that allows them, that is the trend, because people are buying those like hotcakes because they do not want to maintain a big yard. They want a single family home, but they don't want to maintain a big yard. And you look at Fairmount area, you know, you're sort of seeing it go back to those trends back then of small, you know, the narrow lots, somewhat deeper, but the narrow lots, and not having a lot of yard to maintain. And would really, staff would make a recommendation, you know, we'd like to recommend to entertain those 5-yard setbacks, the minimal setbacks on only in not your R1s, but in the B3. Once again, we're talking about residential development in B3 zones, PBD, is to allow that flexibility in those setbacks. And again, it's a very minimalistic use in a B3 district. It's not even as intense as the multifamily that could go on there. but it's allowing some more flexibility for some development to be allowed in those districts should they choose to do the single family homes. Like I said, that's your Horton Homes, Name Your Home Builder. They're looking for those 50-foot by 100-foot lots, 5,000 square foot lots that they can put a home on, and the homeowner has some green space. They're single family, but they have some green space. Don't have a lot of green space, and that is the trend right now in home building for that price range, is the smaller lot home. And I wouldn't entertain that for a R1 zone, but in a B3 zone, why not? I mean, staff would be, why not? Because of what intense zone that is to begin with. That we feel like putting these setbacks on there like you were building in an R1A zone doesn't make a lot of sense to us.
So Tim also, and I forget if it was Sheriff who talked about the conservation subdivision where you do put small lots in R1, but then you have green space that is shared. So you push all that extra land into green space and common area. And the concept was Nielsen. No, I forget who the guy is. I heard him in Kingsport a bunch of years ago. It's kind of a golf, can be, he talked about a golf course without the golf course. So that the majority of people who live on a golf course don't play golf. But they like the paths, they like the green space, etc. But anyway, so people have smaller lots, houses are closer together, but there's common area that, and perhaps greenways or whatever that connect stuff. So anyway.
Tim, I'm listening to what you're saying about this. You're talking about the national trend. I have a hard time visualizing this happening in a B3. Right. I could see them going out to the edge of town and buying a farm and saying, okay, we're going to do a development. They're not going to do something on a 5-acre tract. They're going to want a 50-acre tract and do something like that. Now you start getting into zoning and spot zoning. If you're going out in the middle of nowhere and doing a B3, you're looking real close to spot zoning as opposed to an R zoning that would accommodate what they would want to do.
No, what we're trying to do here is not have somebody go out and buy a tract and want it zone B3, is to allow, B3 by rights, you can have single family and duplex already. And by rights, you can have, by special use, and everybody seemed to be okay with it by right to have multifamily in that zone. And what staff is trying to do is look at the zone and say, if these are allowed by right, could we not be less restrictive on some of the issues like the side yard setbacks to allow a more intense single family use in these high intense zones that you already have that could be anything from a shopping center to a single family home. Is our intent is just to look at these B3 areas and say, should somebody choose to do those, should we be as restrictive on these setbacks as we are? Like you were almost trying to force them into an R1A zone all of a sudden from a B3. And we do have some strategic development areas that have been adopted by city council along the parkway, and that could be, adopted for those uses on those strategic development areas to, because if you want that mixed single family, multifamily, commercial use in those areas that we've established. But also we have some interest currently in some B3 properties that they don't want to do B3 things. The area does not dictate the B3, but they do want to do some single family homes and do some of those types of developments. And when we started looking at the ordinance, we're like, wonder why we are so restrictive in a B3 for this restrictive for residential. I mean, that's what got us started looking at this. And like I said, those home builders are looking for those 5,000 square foot lots.
I guess the point I'm making and the question I've got is, instead of trying to make a B3 work, what if we had a different zone, a new zone that catered to what you're talking about, and then you catered it right down to everything that you're talking about instead of trying to make it fit into a B3. And also what that would do is, because we do have a shortage in housing, maybe that would then encourage some of these national guys to come in and do some subdivisions that would fit into the new type of zone that we're talking about.
I mean, that's a way we could do it to allow it more. I mean, once again, we're just looking at the B3 because of what y'all been through the past months on special use permits for multifamily, and that got us looking at the residential, the single family. Why are we so restrictive on setbacks and things inside the B3? I would suggest, at some point we do look at our residential zonings to open it up possible for a different zone. We have that planned residential development now, I think has some more flexibility in it. I don't think the setbacks are as flexible in that planned residential development. And the green space requirements in that PRD can be high. I mean, because it has to be usable green space. So, but it's something we could look at. But I would suggest, for your density's sake, I mean, when you look at residential zones, you obviously look at those densities per acre, is try to, it'd have to be almost like you said, a new residential zone established somewhere in between an R3 and our R2 zone to allow some different density. And we can do that. I'm not opposed to that. I don't think staff's opposed to that as an additional zone. We're just trying to look, and like I said, we have some development.
What I'm asking, is it better to try to tweak existing zones or look at a brand new zone that does everything in today's world, the way the builders want to do it today, the way the residents are, what they're looking for, and we were to create a zone that catered to that?
No, I think that's a good thing to do. I mean, I don't disagree with that at all. Well, I said we had some interest in some B3 from multifamily to single family. And so that's why we had just started looking at the B3 part of it to try to see, because once again, we were just looking at intensities of use in the B3 that are allowed already. Not that we weren't, I think it is very wise to go look at those, and even if it's a new residential zone, instead of the R2, somewhere in between an R2 and R3 for a single family duplex type developments. So I agree with that, to do that. I think once again, then ultimately you'd need to tweak your B3 to allow it inside of it, maybe, or allow more intense use or less setback inside, possibly. I think your B3 could look different slightly than the residential zone that you're talking about. Could, doesn't have to, if you're going to allow it inside of B3. So just food for thought. Right now, I mean, we'd like to try to draft some. We'll look at both and see what we can come up with from a regulation standpoint, and try to get that in front of you all to better look at it, what it may look like.
Okay, what else do you need from us tonight on this?
Sheriff, do you think we've got everything to start working that we need?
I think so. I think we've got the, at least we can start a draft or start some draft ideas. I guess is probably the right way to say it.
So I think we've got what we need from you all.
Okay, we're ready for training update.
Oh, well, let's just once be thinking about this adaptive reuse. And The biggest one being the Rosemont School has recently changed hands. They do have some ideas they want to throw out for use. It does not fit in our current zonings. R2 is there, and we can craft some regulations to see if you all would like to entertain some denser uses for dwelling units or other uses that may be compatible with the neighborhood to go in those, specifically looking at Rosemont right now, but there are some other challenge buildings out there that, short of being torn down and developed residentially, will just be sitting there at some point. So,
Tim, I have a question about the building on the Cedar. Will the renovation of Cedar take that building or not?
no, the East Cedar Street improvements will not take the building. It'll all be along the frontage, the existing right of way.
It's awfully close now to the right of way, isn't it?
It is, but I mean, it still fits within the existing right of way.
I'd say for sure pursue that. But that whole concept.
Okay.
That's
I agree with Margaret.
Yeah.
All right, we'll look at that. So, not to steal your thunder, but training. Ms. Smith will present property rights and looking at what was the other topic y'all had asked us about during
The
that?
one other topic I have on my list is criteria to be applied when you're looking at a rezoning.
Yes.
So,
and we want to do that training at 5 p.m. right before the December Planning Commission meeting, which currently is scheduled for the 21st, and y'all may want to move that since that's Christmas week, but we can talk about that more next month if you want to move December's meeting. So, but we'd like to have that training at 5 p.m. before the December meeting. Everybody has to have 1 hour of property right training, so please make sure to attend, or we'll have to, I guess we could record it and y'all could watch the recording. Is that correct, Danielle?
I think that would be fine. And it's possible if we have electronic meetings extended through the end of the year, that the whole thing would be electronic and recorded anyway. So.
Yes. And then make sure you get your other hours. Y'all have your list. I'm not going to call out names, Mr. Chairman, but
Really?
Now that the Braves are no longer playing, I'll be spending some time on those seminars.
Mr. Buck might be in the same boat, so.
Listen, utility training for city council is 12 hours for 12 to 15 hours. So planning commission gets off easy with 4. So.
But yes, make sure to get your training. If you do trainings, please report them to us. Once again, that 1 hour training will propose 5 p.m. on December meeting. And we'll talk about the time for the December meeting. Next planning commission meeting will be November 16th. So it's hard to believe we're moving on with the year. That's all I have. Mr. Chairman.
It's not on the agenda. What's the update on sunsetting?
We took that off the agenda. We had a regulation, Danielle and staff worked really hard to present for you all to adopt. We pulled that off the agenda we went back and we're looking at other language. We'd been so intent on the sunsetting part of it and have that language ready. When we started reading the other language in that regulation, we felt we need to clean up some other language in there just when we started reading other language. But the sunsetting part, we do have that ready to go. We're going to bring it to y'all next month with some other cleanup in there that we noticed to clarify some things and put in there some provisions for when you all are put it, the biggest thing was provisions for what people need to show on a plan for you all to look at a special use permit. What drawing information they need to put on there. There's nothing in the reg that spells that out in any of the zoning ordinance. So we really wanted to add that in. And that's what the biggest thing we noticed as we were getting ready to, it was actually printed and ready to put in the packet. So we're like, oh, we need to look at this other stuff. We've been so intent on looking at the sunsetting part, but we will have that regulation to you all for consideration next month with some additional items inside of that we haven't discussed. So,
thank you, sir. Running around the horn real quick, are there any members that have an issue or anything they want to say or bring up? Staff?
Your house for supper, right?
Hey, I just put the shells in the oven.
Maybe you got.
I got enough. Come on.
Kelly, I would like to say one thing.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to tell Jason we're all praying for him to get through this season.
Oh my word.
with some sanity.
Oh. Where is Jason? Is he still on here?
I could just make one public service announcement for all the voters out there that may be watching. Do not wear your campaign material within 100 feet of a polling location. It is a Class C misdemeanor. And treat our election officials who are on the front lines of this pandemic with respect as they carry out their duties and uphold their oath.
Thank you, sir.
Jason.
Well said.
And one other item, we are having two East Cedar Street construction meetings with the public. First one's tomorrow night at 6 p.m. at the Slater Center Gym. And the following Tuesday, the 27th at 6 p.m. also in Slater Center Gym. So any resident out in the area in East End that wants to come by and hear about the construction has started out there on the King University property, be more than happy to have them there at those meetings. And they will, if you do come, please, masks are required inside the building and you will be screened in. So we do appreciate that.
The ironic part is that road y'all are cutting is where the road used to be. Or pretty close.
Yes, it is.
Yep.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, anything else? Let's eat tacos.
Amen.